Well, the banking industry is in rough shape. It is worse than the last American financial crisis. Bloomberg's Lindsey has been doing a historical comparison. She joins us now with the details. Lindsey.
Well, Deirdre, look, the last time we had a banking crisis of this magnitude was 20 years ago in the midst of the savings and loan crisis. And what I found from digging through the data is that you can argue the damage was far worse last time around, and that the banking sector typically and historically always pulls through. Take a look at these charts we created. Number one, the FDIC reported yesterday there were 552 problem banks in the third quarter. Seems like a lot. Until you compare that to what we saw in 1987 when we had more than 2,100 banks on that list. Same thing with the number of failed banks. 124 so far this year, about 1 to 5 more expected per week. Compare that, though, to the high in 1989 when we saw 531 banks fail in 1 year. Finally, when it comes to total assets of these problem banks, as of the third quarter, they were $346 billion strong. In 1991, nearly $834 billion. I mean, really, the takeaway here is that these numbers show the banking sector's been through far worse in the past, about 20 years ago. And as one researcher at the FDIC told me, it's bound to make its way through again, and it may be easier this time around to recover. Deirdre?
All right. Now, Lindsey, as you just said, banking landscape changing a lot in the past 20 years. But is it a fair comparison?
I mean, look, yes and no. I mean, definitely 20 years ago, you had a lot more small regional banks in the 80s and 90s, about 17,400 to be exact, and according to the FDIC. Today, you have far fewer, about 8,100, many more branches. But if you break down those numbers and you do some good old division, which I broke on my calculator, you find that 6.8% of U.S. banks are on the FDIC's problem list today. If you look back in 1987, you had almost double that. 12.4% of banks were on that list. That's 1 in 8 banks. Whether the impact was diffused or not because there were so many more banks, apples and oranges, we've been through much worse before, though, researchers will tell you, and we'll get through it again. Finally, let me give you one last piece of data here. Timeline. I mean, back in the 80s in the S&L crisis, it took 9 years when this crisis began back in 1982 to get through it. We're expecting this crisis will last no more than 5 years. Back to you, Deirdre.
Lindsey, thanks so much. Lindsey Arent there for us from D.C.